History has a funny old way of repeating itself. Take Sonoma State athletics, for example. Some 50 years ago now, the school cut its athletic department entirely. It was brought back a few years later, lived a modest but noble life, but has now been dropped again, cut entirely for the second time. By the way, good luck finding this fact in any news story about the current situation. A few have referenced the school dropping football in 1996, but seriously, most media outlets covering SSU dropping its athletics program have totally neglected what is both a relevant and honestly massive point about this story. Hell, at least Stargate SG-1 would at least sometimes reference things that happened in the movie. I mean, even the puffy shirt in Seinfeld got a callback when Kramer went on Regis and Kathy Lee for his coffee table book interview. Yet next to no one is mentioning the fact SSU in history has already once cut its athletic department entirely. What the hell? You will hear words like historic and tradition mentioned in regards to the Seawolves, or formerly Cossacks, athletic teams. Really, Sonoma State doesn't have that many high-profile athletic moments since the school welcomed the first intake of students all the way back in 1961. Sure, the football team had Larry Allen in its 2 short spells of existence. More recently, Jalen Wells of the Memphis Grizzlies spent a pair of seasons playing in the Wolves' Den before moving on to Washington State and eventually the National Basketball Association. And I do think it's important to recognize some of the other athletic achievements over the years to have happened at Sonoma State. Both men's and women's soccer have hoisted the national championship at the D2 level. Baseball has been solid under John Goles, regularly reaching the postseason and producing a few minor leaguers over the years. He's been coaching that team since 1986, by the way. That's a hell of a track record. Elsewhere, Sonoma State softball, golf, tennis, they've all had moments over the years, not that you or anyone would know about them if you lived outside Rohnert Park. Then again, most people who live outside of Rohnert Park don't know Rohnert Park exists in the first place. It sort of gets lost in that conveyor belt of traffic that has developed between San Francisco and Santa Rosa on 101. To those who are unfamiliar, it's home to one of a handful of Scandia family fun centers, 2 of the 3 Sonoma sourdough sandwiches locations, and Don Julio's, where the pupusas are off the hook. Seriously, try them if you're ever around. More importantly though, at least as it relates to this story, the town itself has been a key element in Sonoma State athletics over the years. Self-glossed the friendly city, the local community has on multiple occasions funded SSU sports teams. To understand this, you need to understand history. So way back in the early 1970s, the students at Sonoma State voted to abolish their fees because, like all college students, they hated student fees. In the aftermath of this, the student government collapsed entirely, and there was a shortfall in the athletic department's budget. The program, though, it didn't vanish right then and there. Instead, the local community came to its aid, funding the gap for a few years. Now, it was not all sunshine and roses. Football costs were so high that it wasn't possible to keep that team going past 1972. However, the instability that came along with this hand-to-mouth existence worried both the school as well as the Far West Conference, the conference this school played in. And eventually, they just decided it was better to not have sports than continue on with this plethora of fundraisers and other ways to raise money. At the time athletics were dropped at SSU, the then president said they weren't important. Of course, that flew in the fact of reality. If they weren't important, why did the local community step up and keep the entire athletic department afloat for a few years after these students pulled their money back? So this is where things get confusing. SSU drops out of the Far West Conference in spring of '74 as it looks to eliminate athletics. Later on in '74, the California state government would pass Bill AB 3116. This basically gave funds to schools across the CSU and UC systems that could be used to fund athletic programs or other programs at the school, interdisciplinary programs that were really on the chopping block. By the fall of 1974, those running Sonoma State were like, oh crap, we don't want to leave the conference anymore, but by that point it was too late. They were forced to reapply for admission to the FWC, which was approved. However, 1 year later, Governor Jerry Brown is at the state capitol in Sacramento, and he decides, you know what, we're not going to keep going with AB 3116, and that means there's no more money for sports at Sonoma State. With that, it's just gone. If you go back and look at the Sonoma State record books between 75 and 78 for most programs, there's just no history. There's no sports. It's lights out. They stayed gone for a few years, but then the local community steps up again and helps bring back SSU athletics. It was by no means an easy process, and it would actually take years before Sonoma State would regain admittance into the Far West Conference, its former home. Funding still wasn't fully fleshed out. It was very much still a hand-to-mouth existence, but the Cossacks, or now the Seawolves, got things done. Realistically speaking, things at SSU have never been easy over the years, and it's not just from an athletic standpoint. Enrollments and budgets have fluctuated wildly over the years. In some cases, as we see in the mid-1970s and today, the reaction was very knee-jerk, like let's just make a bunch of slapdash decisions without looking at the long-term bigger picture. Other times though, such as during the 1980s, those running the school had a more measured approach. They made cuts where cuts were needed, but didn't do anything irrational or that would be regretted later on down the line. That, by the way, is pretty much how education in America has worked. It ebbs and it flows. For every generation that rejects education, those people end up regretting it and urging their kids to go to school. Good parents don't want to see their offspring making the same mistakes they did, and one of the biggest mistakes you can make is not having an education. There's also the element athletics plays in the university experience, even at the Division II level. It gives many students a chance to continue playing a sport they love, a passion they wish to pursue. It's not about wins and losses, national championships, attendance, fans, any of that stuff. I mean, those are nice. I'm not going to deny that winning is good, but at the D2 level, it's really not what it's about. Really, it's more about the experience athletics offers. The Sonoma State football program had coaches like Gary Patterson, Dan Hawkins, and Tim Walsh come through the doors. But just as important, if not more important, were the opportunities provided to students. And I'm not just talking about the players on the teams. I'm talking about student media, marketing, game day operations, teaching, sports stuff. There are so many different things that come along with an athletic department ecosystem that most people don't realize. Cutting intercollegiate athletics cuts all of those opportunities. What's really happening here with SSU eliminating its athletic department for the second time is that doors to dreams are being closed. It is super easy to focus on what was. Oh, Sonoma State athletics had this, that, or the other. That's true, and it sucks losing history. But that isn't the real shame here. The real shame are the opportunities being taken away, and being taken away in a situation that has already played out once in history and should have been learned from. Apparently, no one at the school has been willing to go back and review the history of Sonoma State and the athletic department. Athletics have an important multifaceted role in the college experience at any level. Major, FCS, D2, D3, NAIA, JUCO, you name it. That is what Sonoma State is losing. The difference though between today and 50 years ago is a simple one. 50 years ago, the students made the decision to stop funding athletics and everything at the school. They said, we aren't paying student fees, that's it. And then the local community stepped up to keep things afloat. Today, the decision had no input from students. That's not fair. And it also fails to realize what we've already seen play out in the past. People, both students and the local community, have realized that a Sonoma State with athletics, with sports teams, is better than a Sonoma State without that athletic department. And that's why it got brought back all of those years ago. I imagine that is what will happen here too. A few years down the track, those in Roanoke Park will see the error of their ways and revitalize Sonoma State athletics. After all, that is what happened in the past, and history, well, it has a funny way of repeating itself. Sadly, it's too late for those student athletes now dealing with not only the fallout of the administration's current decision, but the slew of morons who somehow believe that SSU's decision somehow vindicates their own crappy beliefs. Sonoma State is dropping athletics again. For a school that chose its moniker of the Seawolves after a Jack London novel that bears the same name, you'd think they would heed one of his more famous quotes. The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to know more about Simon Fraser, Canada's only NCAA football team, finally pulling the plug on its program, check out the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And for the story of how college basketball's original Cinderella was also a scandal-plagued mess, we'll check out the video in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback, RIP Sonoma State Seawolves. And as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.